She delivered the babies of generals' wives and businessmen. They left the delivery room paralyzed for life. Doctors blamed complications. But when 40-year-old midwife Elena Martinova was arrested in 1995, it turned out that this was revenge that had been 15 years in the making. Revenge for what had happened to her when she was 20. Revenge that she had methodically carried out in operating rooms while the elite slept peacefully. Zerdlavsk, now Yekaterinburg, in the early 1990s was a city of contrasts. Factories stood idle, salaries went unpaid for months, and queues for bread stretched for hours. But at the same time, new rich people appeared. Directors of privatized enterprises, cooperators, officials who seized power at the moment of the collapse of the system. They drove foreign cars, built cottages, and sent their wives to give birth not in ordinary maternity hospitals, but in elite wards where they could get a private room, good food, and the attention of the best doctors. City Maternity Hospital No. 3 on Malisheva Street was considered one such place. It was an old building, constructed during the Stalin era, but with modern equipment for its time, obtained from Germany as part of humanitarian aid. The wives of generals from the Ural military district, the spouses of major businessmen, and the daughters of regional officials were brought here. The city's best obstetricians worked here, as well as anesthesiologists with many years of experience, and neonatologists who had trained abroad. Among the medical staff was midwife Elena Sergeyevna Martinova. She turned 38 in 1992. She was a short, thin woman with short, dark hair, always neatly trimmed, with delicate features and deep-set gray eyes. She had been working at the maternity hospital since 1980, rising from junior nurse to senior midwife. Her colleagues described her as a high-level professional, calm, collected, never raising her voice, working precisely, without fuss. Patients spoke positively of her, attentive, delicate, able to calm them down in critical moments. Elena's personal life was sparse. She was unmarried, had no children, and lived alone in a two-room apartment in a residential area. Her parents died in the mid-1980s, her father from a heart attack, her mother from cancer. She had no brothers or sisters. She had practically no friends, and her colleagues knew only what was relevant to her work. After her shift, Elena would go home, read medical literature on weekends, or walk around the city. No hobbies, no passions, no romances. Her life was reduced to work and loneliness. But none of her colleagues knew that inside this quiet, inconspicuous woman, rage had been festering for 18 years. Rage that did not fade away, but instead turned into cold, methodical determination. Determination that turned her into one of the cruelest criminals in the history of Soviet and post-Soviet medicine. It all began in 1979. Elena Martinova was 20 years old. She was in her third year at the Zerdlavsk Medical College, training to become a midwife. She was a model student. Good grades, responsible, disciplined. She lived in a dormitory and worked part-time as a nurse in a hospital to pay for textbooks and clothes. Her parents helped, but the family was not wealthy. Her father worked as a factory mechanic, and her mother was a store saleswoman. In November 1979, a classmate invited Elena to a party. She said it was a friend's birthday and that there would be interesting people, music, and food. Elena didn't usually attend such events, but her classmate insisted, saying she needed to relax and take a break from her studies. Elena agreed. The party was held in an apartment in the center of Zerdlavsk, in an old building with high ceilings and stucco moldings. The apartment was huge, with expensive furniture and imported appliances. For those times, it was a luxury available only to the children of the nomenklatura. There were about 15 people at the party, young people between the ages of 20 and 25, well-dressed and self-confident. They drank imported alcohol, smoked foreign cigarettes, laughed loudly, and discussed where they had vacationed that summer: Crimea, Sochi, and Bulgaria. Elena felt out of place. These people were from another world. the sons of factory directors, party officials, and high-ranking military officers. They looked at her condescendingly, as if she were a curiosity, a girl from a working-class family who had stumbled into their company by accident. The classmate who had brought Elena quickly disappeared into one of the rooms with a young man, leaving her alone. Elena wanted to leave, but it was already late. Around 11 p.m., there was no transportation, and the dormitory closed at midnight. She decided to wait for her classmate, sat in a corner, drank tea, and tried not to attract attention. But she did attract attention. 3 young men sat down next to her, started talking, and offered her a drink. She refused. They insisted, became intrusive, grabbed her by the arms and waist. Elena tried to leave, but they blocked the exit, dragged her into one of the rooms, and locked the door. Even 20 years later, Elena could not remember what happened next without feeling physical pain. The 3 men took turns raping her for several hours. She screamed, but the music drowned out her cries. She resisted, but they were stronger. When they were done, one of them, tall, blonde, with cold blue eyes, said to her calmly, almost friendly, if she went to the police, she would be expelled from school, her parents would be fired from their jobs, and she herself could be accused of prostitution. They had connections, money, and power. No one would believe her. It was better to forget and move on. Elena left the apartment around 4 in the morning. She walked through the night city to her dormitory, more than 5 kilometers. It was cold. It was snowing. She was wearing a light jacket and no hat. She made it to the dormitory, sneaked in through a basement window, and went up to her room. She locked herself in, lay down on the bed without undressing. She lay there until morning, not crying, not moving, just staring at the ceiling. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to the hospital. She didn't tell anyone, not even her parents. She continued her studies as if nothing had happened. She took exams, practiced, and smiled when necessary. But something inside her broke. Something went out forever. She stopped trusting people, stopped feeling joy, and stopped making plans for the future. She lived mechanically, doing what was necessary, but not really living. The classmate who brought her to the party tried to talk to her a week later. She apologized, saying she didn't know it would turn out that way, that the guys were joking around. Elena looked at her coldly and said, "Don't come near me again." Her classmate backed off. They never spoke again. Elena graduated from college in 1980. She was assigned to City Maternity Hospital No. 3. She started working. Work became her refuge, a place where she could control the situation, where she was respected, where she felt useful. She helped women give birth, saw a new life come into the world, and this gave her existence some meaning. But the rage did not go away. It accumulated, grew, and turned into an obsession. Elena thought about those 3 men every day. She tried to find them, to learn their names, but she couldn't. She only remembered their faces, their voices, the atmosphere of the apartment. She understood that she would never be able to find them, never be able to punish them. The system, money, and connections protected them. They lived their lives, probably without even remembering her. Perhaps they had wives, children, careers. They were happy, protected, untouchable. And then Elena made a decision. If she couldn't get to them, she would get to their entourage, their wives, their daughters, their mistresses, the women who benefited from their money, their power, their protection, who lived in luxury, unaware of the price that had been paid for it, who came to give birth in elite maternity hospitals through their connections, expecting the best service and the best conditions. It was the logic of a sick, twisted mind. But for Elena, it was perfectly rational. Working in Maternity Hospital No. 3, Elena quickly understood how the system worked. Ordinary women gave birth in shared wards, with minimal comfort, often without pain relief, and with rude treatment from overworked staff. But there were others, those who arrived on a call from above, who were placed in private wards, who were provided with the best doctors, imported medicines, and extra attention. These were the wives of factory directors who, in the early 1990s, became owners of privatized enterprises. The wives of generals and colonels of the Ural Military District, the spouses of regional administration officials, the mistresses of businessmen who were beginning to build their empires on the ruins of the USSR, the daughters of party workers who deftly repainted themselves as Democrats and continued to hold power. Elena watched them with cold interest. She studied their manners, their conversations, their demands. They were self-confident, spoiled by attention, accustomed to having their wishes fulfilled immediately. They complained about inconveniences that ordinary women in labor would consider a luxury. They demanded exceptional food, special care, special treatment. And Elena saw in each of them a continuation of those who had ruined her life. Maybe they weren't directly to blame. Perhaps they didn't even know what their husbands had done in their youth. But they enjoyed the fruits of this system, where money and connections decided everything, where some could do whatever they wanted to others and get away with it. The selection of victims was methodical. Elena studied the incoming patients, read their charts, found out who their husbands were, what positions they held, and what connections they had. She chose those whose husbands were influential enough, but not so much that they would cause too much of a fuss if problems arose. A mid-level general, a factory director with several thousand employees, a deputy head of administration, high enough status to arouse Elena's hatred, but not so high that the incident would attract the attention of the prosecutor's office or the FSB. It was also crucial that the births be difficult enough. First births, women over 35, multiple pregnancies, breech presentations, and weak labor. In such cases, complications would seem natural, and the medical commission would attribute everything to objective circumstances. Elena did not rush. She chose her first victim only 12 years after her own trauma, in 1992. She was 33 years old, already an experienced midwife, knew all the intricacies of the job, and had access to medicines, medical protocols, and confidential information. The first case occurred in March 1992. A 37-year-old woman, the wife of the director of a large machine-building plant, was admitted to the maternity hospital. It was her first pregnancy, and the delivery was complicated. Weak labor, large fetus. Elena Martinova was on duty. The delivery lasted more than 12 hours and required stimulation and pain relief. The baby was born healthy, a boy weighing 3,800 grams. But 2 hours after giving birth, the woman began to complain of numbness in her legs. Then she lost feeling in her hands. Then she stopped moving altogether. A neurologist was called, and an examination was carried out. The picture resembled a stroke or spinal cord injury. Tests showed changes in the blood, but the cause could not be determined. The woman was transferred to intensive care and connected to a ventilator. A week later, she died. A medical commission conducted an investigation. The conclusion: complications from childbirth, cerebral thrombosis caused by stress, and blood loss. No medical errors were found. The deceased woman's husband made a fuss, demanding that the doctors be punished, but the commission was adamant. The birth record was flawless, all procedures were performed correctly, and medications were administered according to instructions. It was simply a tragic coincidence. The second case occurred in August of the same year. The patient was the 34-year-old wife of a military prosecutor. It was her second childbirth, but there were complications: gystosis and high blood pressure. Elena was on duty again. The delivery went relatively smoothly, and the baby girl was born healthy. But the next day, the new mother woke up paralyzed. She could not move her arms or legs, and her speech was slurred. A neurologist diagnosed massive damage to the spinal cord of unknown etiology. The woman survived, but was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Her husband, a colonel in the prosecutor's office, conducted his own investigation, questioned all the doctors and nurses, and demanded the exhumation of medical waste and the inspection of medicines. But he found nothing. The records were clean, all procedures were documented, and witnesses confirmed that the delivery had proceeded without complications. The commission again issued its verdict. A rare complication, individual intolerance, no medical error. The third case occurred in February 1993. The 29-year-old daughter of the deputy head of the regional administration. First birth, young, healthy girl. Pregnancy went normally, but the birth was prolonged and required stimulation. Elena was on duty. The baby was born healthy, but 4 hours later, the mother fell into a coma. The doctors fought for 3 days, but they couldn't save her. Death was caused by respiratory and cardiac arrest. The father of the deceased, an influential official, used all his connections to get to the bottom of the matter. He invited experts from Moscow and demanded an autopsy and analysis of all the drugs used during childbirth. The examination lasted a month. The result: death was caused by a severe allergic reaction to one of the drugs used to stimulate labor. A rare case that could not have been foreseen. The doctors acted according to protocol. No one was to blame. The 4th, 5th, and 6th cases followed at intervals of several months. Always different women, different circumstances, but the same midwife was on duty during childbirth. Always complications that seemed natural, but led to paralysis or death. Medical commissions threw up their hands. Experts theorized about rare pathologies, statistical anomalies, and bad luck. No one wanted to admit the obvious, that a killer was working in the maternity hospital, because that would mean scandal, the institution's closure, criminal cases against the management, and inspections by the Ministry of Health and the prosecutor's office. It was easier to blame it all on medical errors or tragic coincidences. By the end of 1995, Elena Martinova was involved in the death or disability of 9 women. 9 wives, daughters, or mistresses of influential people. 9 cases that went unpunished because no one wanted to dig deeper. The investigation later reconstructed the method Elena used. It was simple, effective, and left virtually no evidence. Elena used Soviet pharmaceuticals that were rarely used by the 1990s, but were still stored in the maternity hospital's utility rooms. These were drugs developed in the 1950s and 1960s with substantial side effects, which were later replaced by safer analogs. But they were not disposed of. They were simply put away in distant cupboards where they gathered dust for years. One of these drugs was an old-generation muscle relaxant, which in large doses caused paralysis of the respiratory muscles and could lead to respiratory arrest. Another was a vasoconstrictor, which in the wrong dosage caused thrombosis and stroke. The third was an anesthetic that, when administered into the spinal canal in a specific concentration, caused irreversible damage to nerve endings. Elena had access to these drugs. As a senior midwife, she was responsible for keeping track of the drugs and could take them without asking any questions. She knew how to use them, in what doses, and at what times. During childbirth, when the woman in labor was in a state of stress, pain, and fatigue, and when the attention of doctors and nurses was focused on the baby, Elena administered the drug. Sometimes through an IV, adding it to the leading solution. Sometimes through an injection in the back, masking it as epidural anesthesia. Sometimes through an intravenous catheter, which every woman in labor has. The drug did not take effect immediately. It took an hour, 2 hours, sometimes several hours. By this time, the birth was already over. Elena handed the patient over to other nurses and left her shift. When complications arose, she was already at home or in another department. It was impossible to connect her with the incident. Elena filled out the birth records flawlessly. She recorded all procedures and all drugs administered, but only those that were officially approved. No mention of old Soviet drugs, no records of additional injections. If any of her colleagues saw her injecting something, she would explain that it was vitamins, glucose, or painkillers. No one checked. No one suspected anything. Psychologically, Elena acted coldly, without emotion. She did not enjoy killing, did not sit at the bedside of the dying to revel in their suffering. It was not sadism. It was the execution of a sentence. In her distorted perception, she was restoring justice. Each paralyzed or dead woman was payment for what had happened to her at the age of 20. She did not kill the innocent. She killed those who were guilty by association. The wives of those who belonged to the class of rapists, exploiters, and those who used their power with impunity. Elena kept count. In a notebook she kept at home, in a laundry drawer, she wrote down dates, names, and results. Not details, just numbers, initials, outcomes like an accountant keeping track of work done. By the end of 1995, there were 9 entries in the notebook. Everything changed in December 1995, when another patient was admitted to the maternity hospital, the 35-year-old wife of a major general in the Ural military district. It was her second childbirth, but she was no longer young, so there were risks. The woman was admitted on orders from above, placed in the best ward, and assigned the best doctors. Elena Martinova was on duty. She studied the patient's chart and learned who her husband was, a major general, commander of an artillery brigade, hero of Afghanistan, recipient of orders, the perfect victim. Elena decided to act. The birth went smoothly, without any complications. The boy was born healthy, weighing 3.5 kilos. The new mother felt well, was conscious, talked to her husband on the phone, and was happy. Elena administered the drug through an IV an hour before the end of her shift. Everything was as usual. She handed the patient over to the next shift and went home. But this time, something went wrong. 2 hours after Elena left, the new mother began to complain of numbness in her legs. The nurse on duty called the doctor. The doctor examined her, became concerned, and called a neurologist. The neurologist diagnosed incipient paralysis and ordered the patient to be transferred to intensive care immediately. In intensive care, they connected her to all possible equipment: a ventilator, IVs with anticoagulants, and drugs to maintain blood pressure. The doctors fought all night. By morning, her condition had stabilized. The paralysis did not progress. The woman remained alive and conscious, but she could not move her legs. The victim's husband, a major general, arrived at the maternity hospital an hour after the complications began. He was furious. He demanded explanations, yelled at the doctors, and threatened a military tribunal. The chief physician tried to calm him down, explaining that this was a rare complication and that the doctors had done everything possible. The general would not listen. He called Moscow, contacted an acquaintance in the prosecutor general's office, and demanded an immediate investigation. The next day, a commission from Moscow arrived at the maternity hospital. Investigators from the prosecutor general's office, medical experts, and specialists in medical crimes. They seized all medical records for the past 5 years, birth records, and medication logs. They interviewed all the staff, including cleaners and nurses. They checked all the utility rooms, medicine cabinets, and medical waste storage areas. And they began to find strange things. It turned out that over the past 3 years, there had been 9 cases of death or severe disability among women giving birth at the maternity hospital, 10 times higher than the national average. All 9 cases occurred during the shift of the same midwife, Elena Martinova. All 9 patients were wives or daughters of influential people. All 9 cases were attributed to medical complications without detailed investigation. Investigators reviewed the birth records for all 9 cases. The records were perfect. All procedures were documented. All medications were recorded, and all signatures were in place. But experts noticed one detail. In each record, there was a small time gap of 5 to 10 minutes when the midwife was alone with the woman in labor without witnesses. Officially, this time was allocated to hygiene procedures, linen changes, and preparation for transfer to the postpartum ward. But it was during these minutes, as the experts' calculations showed, that an additional substance could have been administered. The medicine storage room was checked. In a faraway cabinet, which was rarely opened, old Soviet-made drugs were found, with expired shelf lives, which should have been disposed of back in the 1980s. Among them were muscle relaxants, vasoconstrictors, and old-generation anesthetics. The logbook showed that the amount of these drugs had decreased over the past 3 years. Someone had been taking them, but there were no entries in the logbook. Elena Martinova had the key to this cabinet. As the senior midwife, she was responsible for tracking all drugs in the department. No one else had access to it. On 23 December 1995, Elena Martinova was detained right at her workplace. She was coming on duty, putting on her gown in the locker room, when 2 investigators and 3 police officers entered. They showed her an arrest warrant. Elena did not resist, did not try to run away, did not scream. She took off her gown, put on her coat, and went with them, silently. The interrogation lasted 8 hours. Elena sat in the investigator's office. Opposite her was the prosecutor's investigator. Next to her was the court reporter, and in the corner was the stenographer. On the table was a stack of medical records, photographs of dead and paralyzed women, and medication logs. The investigator asked questions methodically and calmly. Elena answered just as calmly, without emotion. She did not deny anything. She did not try to justify herself. She did not come up with stories about medical errors or tragic coincidences. She told the truth. Yes, it was her. Yes, she administered drugs that caused paralysis or death. Yes, she did it intentionally, planning every action. No, she has no regrets. No, she does not consider herself a criminal. She was restoring justice. The investigator asked, "Why these women in particular? Did they personally do something bad to her?" Elena replied, "No, they hadn't done anything to her personally, but they were the wives of those who belonged to the class of rapists. They enjoyed the money obtained through power and violence. They lived in luxury, while others suffered. They were part of the system that allowed 3 men to rape her and go unpunished." The investigator asked her to describe the rape. Elena recounted it dryly, without details, as if she were talking about someone else. She described the party, the apartment, and the 3 men. The investigator asked if she had tried to find these men. Elena replied that she had tried for the first few years, but she couldn't. They disappeared into the elite crowd, protected by their connections and money, and then she realized that she needed to target not them, but those around them. The investigator asked the question that tormented everyone. How did she choose her victims? Elena explained her method. She studied the files of incoming patients, found out who their husbands were, and what positions they held. She chose those who were influential enough, but not too much. Those whose births were promised to be difficult, so that complications would seem natural. Those who came in on a call from above, expecting special treatment. The investigator asked if she felt guilty. Elena thought for a moment, then replied, "No." She felt satisfaction. Every time another woman died or was left paralyzed, Elena believed that the balance was being restored, that her pain was at least partially compensated for. The system that protected rapists was now losing its own. The investigator asked one last question. Did she plan to stop? Elena looked at him coldly and said no. She would only stop when she herself died, or when there were no happy families left among the elite. The interrogation was over. Elena was sent for a psychiatric evaluation. The experts worked for 2 weeks. The result? Sane. She was aware of the nature of her actions and could control them. She has post-traumatic stress disorder, which developed after the rape, and has an obsessive desire for revenge. But this does not deprive her of the ability to be responsible for her actions. It was recommended that she be found guilty and punished in accordance with the criminal code of the Russian Federation. The trial of Elena Martinova began in March 1996. They tried not to publicize the trial. There were too many high-profile names among the victims. There were too many uncomfortable questions about why no one had noticed the series of deaths earlier, why medical commissions had turned a blind eye to the obvious, and why influential families had been unable to protect their wives and daughters. The hearings were held behind closed doors, journalists were not allowed in, and relatives of the deceased were advised not to discuss the case. The official press version was vague. A medical worker was accused of abusing authority, leading to serious consequences. There was no mention of serial murders, revenge, or past rape. The prosecutor demanded the maximum punishment, 25 years imprisonment for the totality of the crimes. 9 episodes of intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm resulting in death or disability, aggravating circumstances, particular cruelty, exploitation of the helpless state of the victims, multiple crimes. The defense tried to play on Elena's psychological trauma. The lawyer, a young woman appointed to the case, said that her client was herself a victim, that the rape had broken her psyche, that she needed treatment rather than punishment. She asked the court to take into account mitigating circumstances and to order compulsory treatment in a psychiatric hospital instead of a prison colony. But the court was unyielding. Elena Martinova committed 9 serious crimes, aware of their nature, planning each action, covering her tracks. She did not act in the heat of the moment. She did not lose control. She methodically killed over a period of 3 years. Her trauma cannot serve as an excuse. Elena Martinova's story shocked the Russian medical community. How could this have happened? How could a midwife who had dedicated her life to helping women and newborns turn into a cold-blooded killer? How did the control system allow 9 deaths in a row without investigation? After the trial, large-scale inspections of all maternity hospitals in the Zerdlavsk region were carried out. Control over the accounting of medicines was tightened. Mandatory video surveillance was introduced in delivery rooms, and protocols requiring the presence of 2 medical workers during any procedures involving women in labor were changed. The chief physician of Maternity Hospital No. 3 was dismissed, and several department heads were demoted. The maternity hospital was closed for 6 months for reorganization. But the changes in the system did not bring back the lives of those who died or restore the health of those who were paralyzed. 9 families were left with pain, emptiness, and the question, why? Elena Martinova is serving her sentence in a women's correctional colony in the Perm region. Her fellow inmates treat her with caution. Even among criminals, the murder of defenseless women and the deprivation of children of their mothers is considered despicable. She has been beaten several times and once had boiling water poured on her. The colony administration transferred her to an isolated cell for her own safety. Elena has no regrets. According to prison psychologists, she still considers her actions to be justified. She says that the only thing she regrets is that she was unable to find and punish the 3 men who raped her. Everything else, in her opinion, was a necessary balance. The 3 rapists were never found. The investigation tried to establish their identities based on Elena's descriptions, but too many years had passed. The apartment where the rape took place changed owners several times. The classmate who brought Elena to the party died of cancer in 1992. There were no other witnesses. Perhaps those 3 men are still alive somewhere, unaware that their crime 30 years ago led to the deaths of 9 innocent women. Elena will spend 23 years in prison. 9 women will never return to life. 9 children grew up without mothers. The 3 rapists who started it all went unpunished, and somewhere in the archives lies a file marked Secret that tells this terrible story. A story of quiet revenge that lasted for years and took too many lives.